Samson Dauda is your 2024 Mr. Olympia champion, and deservedly so. He was the best bodybuilder on that stage this year. I think the majority of us should already be on board with this statement. However, one of the best bodybuilders of today was absent from this show, Nick Walker. We all know the story. Last year, Nick got injured before the Olympia, but this year, he essentially pulled out of the show, which didn't sit well with the bodybuilding community. There was also Nick's last stage appearance in New York this year, where many people claimed he looked underwhelming. Nick eventually admitted this himself, but is that entirely accurate? Two main reasons led people to discredit Nick at this show. The first reason was that he was pushed by a newcomer, Martin Fitzwater. In my opinion, Martin looked excellent, but it was clearly a win for Nick. Then at the 2024 Olympia, Martin proved he's one of the best bodybuilders in the world, pushing everyone on that Olympia stage and arguably deserving an even higher placement. The second reason people discredited Nick was his midsection, which was slightly sloppier than in the past, but not a major issue. If it were, the judges wouldn't have awarded him the win, considering modern judging criteria. Aside from the midsection, everything else was improved for Nick. His back, legs, front lat spread. In other words, Nick delivered. So, it's only natural that we compare this version of Nick Walker to your new Mr. Olympia champion Samson Dauda to see what we get. Front double biceps. First of all, if we look at the biceps and the guns overall, Nick Walker is the clear winner, no doubt. Nobody beats him in this department nowadays. And then you have the lower body. Nick was criticized for his legs. Now, Nick doesn't have the best quad sweeps, and he particularly needs that since his upper body is so massive. So let's say he loses that aspect, but he kills Samson when it comes to quad details and muscle separation, which should count for something too. Nick arguably has the better lats too, which give him a decent taper despite his wider waist. So looking at the main muscle groups, Nick Walker doesn't do bad at all against your champion, but we all know bodybuilding isn't only about different muscle groups taken in isolation. The way all these elements connect and flow together is arguably even more important, and in this aspect, Samson beats Nick Walker. Because Samson actually has one of the most aesthetic physiques in the world, while Nick is on the other side of the spectrum. I'm sure there are fans like me, for example, who value more mass and conditioning because, let's admit, Nick wins the conditioning aspect here too, than overall flow. Of course, it's ideal to have them all, but when you have to choose one or the other, for sure, there are fans who would choose the same as me. But the fact is that our judges made it clear what they want, and we are going to try to stick to that as much as possible. So even though personally I wouldn't be convinced Samson should be winning this based on judging criteria, Samson would be the winner of this pose. So I will agree to that with only one mention: it's not as dominant as some would want to make it look. The front lat spread is actually easier to judge because Nick's proportions are really off for this pose, and since his guns are out of the equation, he doesn't have his strongest asset to help him get out of this mess. But it should be mentioned that because of Nick's improved execution of this pose, the gap between him and Samson Dauda in our current matchup here is considerably smaller. Now, don't get me wrong, Samson wins every aspect of this pose, like overall width, overall flow, chest thickness, and so on. So Samson scores a second win in the second front pose, but let's be real, we were expecting that already. We haven't seen Nick's power shots just yet. Side chest pose. Now, this would be a closer pose since when it comes to overall thickness, Nick is one of the best in the world. The side chest is one of Nick's best poses, and we can see why. He's got strong and complete arms and shoulders, his trademark signature, good chest development, and a crazy side leg. Looking at him individually, you can't take away too many things from him. However, he's going against Samson here, who became the best in the world when it comes to this pose in my opinion. I believe this is actually his strongest pose. I think Tyler Mannion mentioned this aspect as well in his review videos. What Samson has besides his towering stature is arguably the best chest genetics in the modern era of bodybuilding. His chest is reminiscent of the golden era guys, whose pectorals were way more developed in relation to the rest of their physiques. Back to our comparison, besides the chest, Samson also has competitive arms and shoulders and an improved side leg. All in all, Samson wins a third pose after seeing the first three poses. You're probably asking why I even did this comparison, but have a little patience. Back double biceps. The first thing I always notice with Nick in this pose is how great his taper actually looks from the back, and then Nick has a way bigger back even though proportionally he's a smaller dude. He also has some of the most impressive bicep peaks from the back, also shoulders, triceps, everything flows great for his upper body. Downstairs, it's even more impressive. Nick definitely has the best lower body seen from behind in the world today. His hamstrings are unmatched, his calves are strong, and his glutes are always dry and defined. Even though Samson improved his lower body at the Olympia, especially the dryness aspect, he only narrowed the gap between him and Nick. He still loses. Samson also loses in the upper body. I think the lighting at the Olympia was actually more favorable for him here, but maybe except for the lower lat muscle separation, he loses everything else against Nick Walker here, so a first big win for Nick in this comparison. The other back pose, the back lat spread, is not that much different. The lower body domination from the mutant remains the same, and for the upper body, even though it's not as dominant as in the previous back pose, I still have Nick winning. Pound for pound, his back is bigger, wider and denser. However, Samson Dauda made huge improvements in the back poses, and if he keeps improving, he has the potential to push Nick Walker or even win against him in the future from the back. But as they look in 2024, Nick Walker wins both back poses against your current Mr. Olympia. So the score is 3-2 for Samson. The side triceps will be the hardest pose to judge because both of them look great. I always say how much I like Samson's new Dorian-esque execution at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, but on the other side we have Nick Walker, who basically looks flawless here. Triceps, check. Round and full chest, check. Defined midsection, check. Side leg, check. Overall conditioning, check. Now, in my opinion, this pose could go either way, but since I'm trying to keep this aligned with today's criteria, Tyler Mannion actually had Samson losing this pose to Hadi in his Olympia review. What I'm seeing from Nick here as far as the execution and the flow is not very far behind Hadi, but on top, Nick has a way better triceps. I'm sure my good friend Dylan from Project Bodybuilding will agree with me when I say this is probably Nick's strongest pose. So even though I consider this pose close, my point goes to Nick Walker, making this 3-3 on poses overall. Abs and thighs, and things have changed in this pose since these two last met each other on stage. At the 2023 Arnold Classic, this was a clear win for Nick Walker against Samson, but here things have turned because Samson improved this pose and Nick got worse. Now, I still think the New York Pro midsection for Nick was just temporary, but we have to judge what we have here. Samson still has the better flow and the better quad sweeps, but I believe his abs also look better than Nick's based on these pictures, so my point goes to Samson Dauda for the abs and thighs. Last pose is the most muscular, which is a great pose for both. These are probably the best two hands clasped variations in the world today. There's always Hadi, of course, but it's a long old story and this video is not about him. Back to Samson versus Nick. Even though I believe Samson improved a lot, I still think Nick's overall thickness coupled with more polish is superior to what Samson brings. Samson brings more overall mass, of course him being a big man, but pound for pound Nick looks thicker and more polished in this pose overall. This is arguably Nick Walker's signature pose, and as much as some of you may hate his flow in some of the other poses, you can't argue against him in this pose, hopefully. We also have these other variations from them both looking good but being more difficult to dissect since they're basically two different poses, so it's easier for me to judge based on the common hands clasped variation where I have Nick Walker winning slightly. So the final score is 4-4, which is great for Nick Walker since this is allegedly one of his weaker versions and Samson's definitive all-time best. Now, if these two physiques met on stage as they look here, I believe Samson would have won, especially because of the judging criteria. The point of this video is to not sleep on Nick Walker, guys. If he manages to get back on stage looking as his similar self with an improved waist, it's danger for anybody. What do you think of my comparison today? Was I biased towards Nick Walker since he's my favorite bodybuilder, or do you agree with my assessment? Everybody is biased anyway, depending on what they think should be rewarded in bodybuilding. Let me know your opinion in the comment section below. Make sure to like this video while you're there for the algorithm, and subscribe also to not miss any of my uploads. See you soon.